So after the success of Despicable Me 2, it was clear that a sequel would be produced. However, unlike the first and second films, whose stories were relatively straightforward to develop, it proved more difficult to formulate the plot of the third movie. This was likely because there was no strong groundwork or established lore to build upon. Eventually, it was decided that Despicable Me 3 would explore Gru's midlife crisis and his sense of purpose in life, while also introducing his convenient, long-lost brother. Unfortunately, these elements are not explored to the degree I had hoped. As a result, I can't help but wonder if there was more interesting ideas that were considered during early development. At the heart of Despicable Me 3 is the relationship between Drew and Gru, as well as the complicated legacy left behind by their father, Robert Gru. Personally, I don't think this aspect of the film was handled particularly well. While the dynamic between Gru and Drew is often funny, it's barely explored to the extent it deserved. In the film, we learned that their father was a famous villain and that he was extremely proud of Gru's accomplishments, so much so that he was disappointed in Drew for failing to live up to the family name. Because of this, Drew wants to embrace his father's legacy and recruit his brother to help him become the world's greatest villain, just like all their ancestors before. Unfortunately, this is essentially the full extent of the exploration of their relationship and the legacy of their family. The film gives us little to no meaningful context about Robert Gru as a person, and Drew's insecurity about being seen as a lesser brother is barely touched upon. In fact, the film skips over this part of the relationship in a very baffling way. But here's where it gets interesting. Robert Gru's appearance was actually retconned between films. In the family tree seen in Gru's house in the first Despicable Me film, Robert looks completely different from his portrait in Despicable Me 3. In the original family tree, he's depicted with short curly black hair, short sideburns, and a horseshoe mustache. Very different from what we see in the third movie. So either Robert Drew dyed his hair and shaved his mustache, or more likely, the filmmakers hadn't figured out what he'd look like in the third movie. The fact that they redesigned him so drastically suggests that there was not a clear vision for Gru's family lineage until late in development. However, concept art clearly suggests that these themes would have been explored much more deeply in the early stages of the film. Eric Guillon's illustrations reveal several fascinating directions the story could have taken. For instance, Drew had his own version of the Minions, many short-legged, long-nosed men dressed in similar uniforms. This implies that either Drew took direct inspiration from Gru's minions, or the Gru family simply had a tradition of employing identical-looking henchmen. This choice feels like a fun nod to the original Despicable Me. In the artwork, Drew also appears aesthetically much closer to Gru, taking inspiration from Spy vs. Spy from the Mad magazines. It's clear this was on purpose. Combined with the Minion followers and the overall look, it's evident that this film originally intended to explore Drew's desperate attempt to imitate his more successful brother. Unable to make a name for himself, Drew tries to recreate the glory days of Gru by having his own minions and recreating Gru's aesthetic. While the movies do lightly touch on Drew's inferiority to Gru, the idea is so undercooked that it might as well have been omitted, though it is worth pointing out that perhaps Drew was just really similar to Gru already and has nothing to do with insecurity. Beyond Drew's potential insecurity about his brother, the same can be said for Gru. In the art, Drew visits Gru's home directly rather than sending his butler, quickly bonding with the Gorals by giving them gifts and playing with them, much to Gru's dismay. He also shares a noticeably warmer relationship with their mother. These details imply the story may have explored both brothers confronting their respective weaknesses and insecurities towards each other, learning to accept themselves and embracing who they truly are as people. The varying designs of Drew in the concept art further indicates extensive experimentation with his character. Was he stoic and rough around the edges, or more creepy and gothic? In several pieces, he looks lazy and almost depressed in the way he dresses and carries himself, evoking a Tim Burton-esque aesthetic. Some artwork even shows him with a giant trench coat and carrying a briefcase, raising the possibility that at one point, Drew was not wealthy in the story and may have been some kind of detective or private investigator. Other pieces depict Gru's extended family, all sharing the same gothic appearance, an element that you can see briefly in the final film, but again is not really explored or touched upon. Another interesting detail from the art shows that the minions did not leave Gru in the early versions. We see them traveling with the brothers in taxis, which honestly would have been a lot stronger of a creative choice. By Despicable Me 3, the creative team seemed unsure about what to do with the minions. While the premise of them quitting was interesting, it led to a series of forced, random misadventures that feel like they exist only because they were deemed funny for kids, rather than because they served the plot. As a result, screen time is wasted on their hijinks instead of focusing on the far more important relationship between Gru, Drew, and the family legacy of these characters. Keeping the minions with them may have solved this narrative issue nicely. The rest of the concept art isn't really that different from the final film, just slight changes in how certain characters look. Anyways, what are your thoughts on Despicable Me 3? Do you like the direction the story took, or do you prefer these potential early versions? Let me know in the comments and subscribe if you're new.